Well, I hope you like numbers and stuff, chat, because that's more or less what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to be talking about numbers in play environments and stuff like that. Despite the fact that I have been playing Magic since the original Innistrad set, that was what, 2011, and yet I'm only kind of just now realizing how brutal it is to brew or one-on-one formats, especially in Arena. Typically, when I've been playing one-on-one, I've been taking established deck lists and messing around with them to my taste, but it's always been just look up a deck list and play a deck that's already viable within a format itself. I don't normally spend my time trying out new deck ideas, trying to make them work. Brawl is the only format where I am actively looking at new ideas to try them out. And I play on Arena a lot. So like, if you look here, I have played 563 matches. I don't know what the average is. I don't actually know how long other people have. There are definitely going to be people who have a lot more matches. This is strictly for Brawl. And again, hashtag not sponsored by UntappedGG. Almost 60 total hours of playtime in Brawl this season. And I have been getting absolutely wailed on. But yeah, I play a lot of Brawl. Part of that is because I stream Brawl every Monday. I also play Brawl in my spare time whenever I want to play Magic, partly because I want to make sure that the decks are ready to stream. I want to make sure that they're at least reasonably showcaseable. And I also just really like playing Brawl in general, partly because it's the closest thing Arena has to Commander, but it's also its own unique format. Brawl has a significantly smaller card pool, and the release schedule is nowhere near as brutal as it is for paper. It's pretty ideal for people who are getting overwhelmed by the amount of paper product that's being pushed out. We also get the alchemy sets, which are digital only and also add a lot to the uniqueness of the format. I have some thoughts on how alchemy is criticized, so if you want to hear those thoughts, I'll be happy to go ahead and make like an actual structured video as opposed to an off-the-cuff one kind of like this. The biggest difference between Brawl and Commander is the fact that Brawl doesn't have a social construct to put pressure on people into curbing the power levels of their decks. Magic Strategy 101, you need to have a game plan, and you need to either do it faster than the other player or slow the other players down enough to play at the speed that you want to play at. Probably the most common way to think about this is how aggro decks win versus how control and combo decks win, right? Aggro wants to end the game as quickly as possible, control wants to drag the game out and establish dominance, and combo wants to find its pieces and go off without interruption. Like I said, it's Magic 101. But what if you rather play something that's less control and more of a pile of synergy? It's something that works out very well in multiplayer because you're less concerned about winning and more concerned about staying in the game and playing with your friends. No one wants to be that person who gets knocked out early on and then has to sit around on their phone while everyone else is playing a archenemy game where two players are trying to keep one player under control and vice versa. That sort of mentality does not translate to a one-on-one format like Brawl. If you want to play a lower powered deck, if you want to play like a fun theme deck, or you want to play a deck that has like a cool interaction, in theory, the matchmaking system on Arena is going to be matching you up against people who have similar deck building strategies. And for the most part, it works. I'm going to have something on the screen, either a confirmation from the dev team during one of their Q&As on Discord, or one of their comment articles, like one of the report articles or whatever, confirming that they were happy with the matchmaking system prior to the leak. And I'm inclined to believe that that is very much the case. The dev team regularly cites their data and how they're looking at their data and how they're happy with what the data is telling them. The data points themselves we do not have access to because, as we saw with those leaks, players will absolutely game the system if they are given information. However, there is an issue with the matchmaking system, and it comes when there aren't enough players in your bracket to give you the kind of game that you're looking for. What this usually ends up being is it expands out and matches you against someone who is either more competitive or less competitive. It's not a perfect science, but it is trying to make sure that you are getting to play a game of Magic without having to wait around for your, quote, perfect match. It's probably most noticeable when you're matched against someone who's way stronger than you are, right? It's also very prominent at the very start of a season when we have very popular commanders that are also very powerful that haven't had a chance to be ranked yet. We're currently 34% win rate against blue-green. Part of that is because of two commanders specifically, Nadu and Tamio. Because Tamio is a very, very effective control commander. Nadu is insane. there's just no way to interact with this without losing out. Because even if you have the kill spell for Nadu, as soon as it hits the board, you target it and it recuperates the value. Nadu is a crime against humanity, but it's just the latest in a long line of Avatar-style chain of successively ridiculous cards. Think Roxanne from Atlas of Thunder Junction, Tulsamir from Mirza Karlov Banner, Hawk, Atali, Rusko. At this point, it is just part of the game. And if we go back to the overall deck statistics that I'm working with here, the times that I have had decks put up positive numbers is when they have been doing something that is either really good or really fast. Usually, ideally, both. So, for example, the Flage deck that we showcased a couple of weeks ago has continued to put up positive win rates, partially because it's really hard for most decks to be able to deal with a giant 6/6 that Lightning Helixes their face or Lightning Helixes their creatures every turn, coming out as soon as turn 3. Similarly, my Kiora deck and my Kalia deck, those have also had really good results, in part because Kiora is built to snowball card value and explode faster than the other decks can if she gets a chance to set up. And then Kalia is dropping Grizzlebrand, Sarah's Emissary, and anything like that on turn 4, turn 5, and that's a very quick concession from the opponents as well. And that's really kind of what you have to do in these formats. You have to play something that is consistent and powerful. You have to play something that is consistently powerful. The issue that I'm having with that, these are decks that I have fun with, but they're to a point of refinement and consistency that I don't enjoy the process as much as trying to figure out like why my Bearless Bear Force Luris Companion deck isn't working, or trying to set up a Brea Simulacrum Synthesizer type engine. When I'm deck building and when I'm brewing, I love how fun it is to try and solve the puzzle of how do we get this deck to work. And it's a type of fulfillment that you can't get from a deck that's already established. Like, I love Feather, but I don't play here nearly as often. I've got, 14 matches on Feather, and then I've got 56 on Gear. Part of that is because I'll play the deck, see if there's any changes I need to make, try some of the changes, I'll get a few wins, and then I go, okay, yep, serotonin achieved. And then I put the deck back so I can go and work on some of the newer decks that have caught my eye. Where the frustration comes is trying to see whether these decks have any legs or not, and then either getting completely run over because you weren't equipped to deal with aggro decks, or you don't get a chance to do anything because you got matched against a control deck and you didn't have any contingencies to handle control. You had everything set up, but then it feels like the opponent invalidated everything you did because they got their 2-card combo, they got their Paradox Engine, Brilliant Ultimatum, or anything like that. That shit gets really, really frustrating as a deck brewer. I think it's just kind of the brewer's dilemma. You're going to throw a ton of ideas at the wall, and they're not all going to stick. Sometimes it's a sign that you've taken the wrong approach to deck, like with the Flage deck. We tried sticking Flage into a Death and Taxes Punisher style deck, and it just did not work. We have to go with a turbo style deck to get Flage up and running, and also to make sure that Flage has enough gas to keep going. And when you play with a commander, you have to be able to meet it halfway and say, okay, these are the tools you need to succeed. Similarly, remember that Luris deck I was talking about? The matches say 14 and 18, like 44%. Beforehand, they were actually kind of worse. And a part of that was because I took a look at the deck. Like, the deck stats are over here. I've got like 30-ish creatures now, but before I was running something like 22-ish. And when I was in the middle of writing this script, it made me think about exactly what I was trying to do with these decks and what role they're supposed to have. And a low to the ground deck like this wants to spit out a lot of creatures really fast in order to actually make use of the reanimation that Luris provides. So this is an example of sometimes you just need to take a step back, look at your numbers, and think about whether the numbers you're providing are actually viable. We'll see it with the Gear Raid deck, where I was having a lot of trouble trying to get Gear Raid off the ground, and then I realized, wait a second, I took out way too many of the token producers to actually try and account for a lot of these other issues that I've been having. So, you know, one of Baby's first deck building issues, learning how to balance answers and game plan. Sometimes you just don't have the resources to build the deck the way it needs to be built. Kind of like what we were saying before with Flage, sometimes you just don't have the resources to build the deck the way it needs to be built. Arena is not inaccessible platform. It takes upwards of 2 years to build a collection robust enough to build a bunch of different decks, and some decks want really specific cards that literally do not have a home anywhere else. Again, looking at the Flage deck, it takes a lot of Thrill Possibility style cards, most of which you can get for commons and uncommons. When you're starting out though, a lot of them are really hard to get because wild cards are harder to pool. Eventually you'll get enough commons and uncommons that you can build a lot of these no problem, but until then, you kind of have to put in all your resources. And then with something as mana intensive as Flage, with that escape cost of having red, red, white, white, you do end up needing to build a lot of wild cards into your mana base. In fact, this is why I often say the first thing you need to work on is your mana base, because all of these other cards, most of them are replaceable. You can find other milling and draw engines for things like Paleontar or Mesmeric Orb, but the mana base is an absolute must. A lot of the other projects that I've tried brewing with are taking those busted commanders that I complain about, things like Tolsomir, things like Nadu and Atraxa, and then trying to build a no rares version of them. And I can testify that if you were to put all of your wild cards into just improving the mana base for those decks, you could literally get away with having no rares in any of the other stacks. I've got decks down here where I'm missing a lot of wild cards to like finish them, but at the same time, if I really wanted to finish a deck, I would take out all the cards that I'm missing and just find substitutes just to start playing them. I've had this Kumina list off of Amy the Amazonia's channel for a while now, and it's a deck that I've been wanting to try out. If I wanted to play this deck as is, I'm going to need a lot more wild cards to actually get this deck to work, because there kind of just is not a replacement for Master of the Pearl Trident, which will give all your creatures unblockable if you get matched against a blue player. There are a lot of other merfolk that you can put in and a lot of different lords that you can put in, but if you want specific effects, then you have to have the wild cards to be able to afford them, or maybe you're playing a creature type that again just does not have that support. So sometimes decks want specific support in order to actually be the deck that you want them to be. A lot of people want to play Shelob as a spiders themed deck, but the issue is if you're playing this on Arena, the amount of spiders that are actually playable is virtually non-existent. We've got 3, 6, 7 spiders here that I think are good enough to include in the deck as is. And that's partially because Shelob has to be on the board in order to actually give the Spider Anthem effect to all these other spiders. And with Brawl being a one-on-one format, it is not worth playing a bad spider just for the upside of becoming an okay spider as soon as Shelob hits the board. In order for this deck to actually be effective in a one-on-one format, what you end up doing is you build a ramp deck that ramps up to Shelob, and then you just start playing control. You start playing all of your fight and bite spells with Shelob on board in order to get the effects, because it's pretty much the exact same thing as getting a bunch of other spiders out. And Shelob's so much bigger than the other spiders by far that if you're going to use fight spells, she's the one that's going to end up living. So sometimes it literally is just the environment forces you to shelve a deck. So what we have here is my Lagrella Blinkbot deck. This was a deck that I had a lot of fun playing during both Murders at Karloff Manor and also Caves of Ixalan during that most recent era of Brawl. The idea was to play Lagrella and blink out a lot of the prototype cards, and to also just get a lot of cool value off of the ETB effect artifacts, so that way Legion of Clay could perpetually scale up, and that way we have really big creatures that just smash in. But as soon as Outlaws of Thunder Junction came out, this deck struggled incredibly hard. With everyone playing Crime, with everyone playing really hard control like Marchesa, and able to just keep up in terms of value, this deck became nigh impossible to run. There are too many pieces that need setup. There's too many individual pieces that can get picked off and kept up with a control deck like Marchesa that just gives them free value. And then if they're playing a Crime deck, they get value off of all these pieces, and they get to pull ahead farther than I can actually keep up with them. The same thing applies to one of my favorite combo decks that we were actually playing beforehand too. If you've ever stopped by those streams, we managed to actually get Arena to the point of absolutely breaking because we had Intruder Alarm, Blood Gas combo with all these other things. And the only real win condition that we had was Altar of the Brood. I mean, that and like Scoot Squirm, but I digress. Because this was a very hard combo deck to put together, that is to say, the combo pieces were 3 and 4 cards long, maybe even longer. This one also suffered a lot when Outlaws of Thunder Junction came out and heavily encouraged control. Arena is a lot of fun. but it is incredibly rough if the reason that you're playing is because you want to express yourself through deck building. A one-on-one format with a limited card pool makes that really, really difficult sometimes. A limited card pool means that a lot of the time there are just going to be this is the best win condition for the deck, or this is factually the best way to build the deck. And it also means that when you're playing one-on-one, you have to be able to build your deck with an idea that a lot of what other people are doing are going to be geared at stopping decks like yours. They're going to be built around Brilliant Ultimatum because Brilliant Ultimatum is just the fastest and easiest way to pull out a win condition out of nowhere. And it's a fact of life that you just kind of have to accept. If you want to build a deck that values playing a lot of different lands, you're going to want to build it as a very green heavy ramp deck, which means that you're going to rely on a lot of the same tools that a lot of the same ramp decks use. You're going to play Stomper, Flare of Cultivation, Augur, Tireless Provisioner, Spelunking, Six, Scoop Swarm, Room Map, Nissa, Harrow, Entis, Restoration, Dryad, Azusa. You're going to play all of these cards because these are just the strongest and best options. And if you want to play any other decks that care about lands, these are going to be the first cards that you grab. As someone who wants to express herself and wants to build a deck that feels unique to everything else, this drives me up the wall, but it is a necessary evil if you want the deck to survive in the wild, because you can do all the cute interactions that you want. You can be like, oh, we can go ahead and turn this into a reanimator deck because we have all the lands as dredge, and maybe there is some merit to that, but you're going to struggle a lot more than someone who leans into the gimmick and commits to the bit. Greater Hoof Behemoth might feel like a super cheesy win, but it still wins, and there's a good reason why it still wins. Reanimate Elish Norn. Yeah, there's a reason why this card just wins games. And again, that's the reality of a one-on-one format. Because even if you don't want to win that way, there are a lot of other players that actively do or don't care. And the only way to really control that is to be willing to right-click concede anytime that you get matched against something that you already know is going to be an uphill battle. Which, for the record, I still advocate for that. Value your time, especially in a free play queue where you're here to have fun, you're here to play the games that you want to play. I have been looking at a lot of those numbers, but most of those losses to blue-green have been concessions because I already know this is not a match that I want to play. I value my time. I'm not going to spend 10 minutes trying to play against a blue-green control deck that's already pulled ahead when my goal is to jam as many games as possible to try and figure out how to make the game good. Part of why I bring this up is because I do see a lot of people complaining about the state of Brawl, and I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person who gets incredibly salty about Nadu being a ridiculous card. I am absolutely going to be critical of it, but I don't want to keep harping on that. Because remember, the alternative to not having fun playing Brawl is to maybe close Arena and try something else for a while. Find another hobby, find something else that you can switch off from Arena when you don't really feel like getting your teeth kicked in, or if you're just getting frustrated. I don't know. These were all just kind of thoughts that I had organized and I wanted to throw together. With all that said, I am going to go ahead and go to today's deck.